Modern life means that we're all super busy all of the time, and in the last 6 months alone, I've been managing my career as a doctor, running marathons, doing content creation, as well as passing postgraduate exams. And the one tool that I have found so useful in keeping track of all of my goals has been my accountability group. I have tried loads of things in self-improvement over the years, and this thing actually works. It's crazy to think that just a 40-minute phone call over Zoom once a week can supercharge my productivity, unleash my full potential, and actually mean that I'm enjoying it as I'm doing it. But that is exactly what happened. And if you're looking to achieve your goals in 2024, then this is the video for you. In this video, I'll go over my experience of my accountability group over the last 6 months, why I think this stuff actually works, what I think makes a good group, and how I'd go about setting up my own group. I've timestamped down below. So if you're new here, I'm Dan. I'm a junior doctor currently living and working in London, and in my spare time, I seem to make YouTube videos. So in February last year, I was doing a podcast with Dr. Sarah Nichols. She's a doctor and a coach, and we were talking about a bunch of things. But after the podcast, she said that she was setting up an accountability group and invited me to join. At first, to be honest, I was pretty skeptical. I enjoy self-improvement, but even an accountability group sounded a bit airy-fairy for me. But for whatever reason, I said yes, and I went along to the first Zoom meeting, and at that point, things got even worse. So I joined the call and found myself on a group call with 4 very successful female entrepreneurs. Some of them had online businesses, successful YouTube channels, others had physical businesses, and then there was me, this bloke who had just quit his job and had made a few YouTube videos. Either way, each week I'd join the Zoom call and we'd talk over the last week that had just gone, what went well, what was really challenging for us, and then we'd look forward to the next week and set some goals. So initially, most of my goals were around putting up more content on YouTube. And if you go back to that time, you can see that I wasn't really hitting those goals every single week. But over time, I got to know the group, I got a bit more comfortable, and to be honest, I probably opened up quite a bit more. My initial skepticism of accountability groups started to fade, and I started to take it a bit more seriously. And with that, I was more honest with how my week had gone, what I'd found really difficult, and more honest with myself. Over time, the group did change and we lost a couple of members, and then it was just myself, Sarah, who I've already mentioned, and Faye, who's the founder of Bear Hug Gifts. And it was just the 3 of us for a couple of months, and then over the summer, I very suddenly lost my job. Suddenly, my life was quite chaotic, and you can go check out this video here as to how I got through that time. But all of a sudden, this accountability group turned into a bit of a support group. And the key thing here that I found really helpful, I think, was the fact that actually I had a good relationship with both Sarah and Faye because we've been chatting for the last few months. But at the same time, they weren't directly involved in even my personal or professional life down here in London. And that meant that it was actually this really nice space where I could get some really unbiased, pragmatic, practical advice. So once that storm had blown over and I managed to get back into regular work in the NHS, I then decided to sign up to PACES, which is the last part of the MRCP, or Membership of the Royal College of Physicians, and it's a really tough practical exam that all medical registrars have to do. You're basically given real life patients and they're not allowed to talk to you. You then have 6 minutes to examine them, and you'll be asked to examine one system, so that may be the heart or maybe the lungs, and you have to quickly examine the whole system and pick up all of the signs that are there. From this, you then have to deduce what the diagnosis is, and immediately you then have to start a 4-minute presentation in front of the examiner and the patient and describe what you found and why you think the diagnosis is this. It is really, really hard and actually really nerve-wracking. And not only was it a really hard exam, I was working full-time as a locum, so I didn't have access to sort of a training group, and I was essentially trying to do this all on my own. As I mentioned, I was working full-time, so I had to finish and then start my revision, so examining patients after work or doing a bit of book work before work. But I knew that when I signed up, in order to pass this exam, I had to have a really clear strategy. And I think the accountability group really helped with that structure and kept me on course. Each week I'd set out a system that I was going to revise. So the first week might have been neurology, and then I would do the book work in the morning, and then after work I'd examine the patients. I'd tell the group which days I was going to stay behind after work, and although I didn't always attend every single session that I said I would, over time I managed to gain some really good consistency and momentum, and it seemed to pay off. Each week we'd meet again and say, did I manage to hit those goals? Did I manage to do exactly what I wanted to? What could I improve? And this really kept me on course. And lo and behold, I did this for a few months, managed to sit the exam. I wasn't super stressed out. Actually, the whole process didn't kill me, and I ended up passing the exam on my first attempt. But not only that, I managed to run a marathon a couple of weeks after. I moved house, I had a new job, I was working full time, and I was doing a bit of content creation. And all of this, I wasn't super stressed out the whole time. I'd essentially achieved some really hard goals whilst keeping a balance on my life, and far from being an absolute misery, the whole process was vaguely enjoyable. And this brings me on to the question of, why does this actually work? Because I do put a lot of that down to the fact that I was meeting every single week, reevaluating where I was going, and having to tell people what I was going to do next week. There are loads of hacks out there, but I think these are the three main things that make it a really powerful tool for productivity: intention, reevaluation, and consistency. So firstly, intention. I think we could all live with a bit more intention in lives, and actually, when you think about it logically, it's crazy that we don't live our lives intentionally. I think the reason that we aren't that intentional is because it requires us to be honest with ourselves, and that's really quite painful sometimes and uncomfortable. The reason this group I found really helpful was because it required me to set intentions. And before you can set an intention, you have to do an inventory of your whole life and be honest with yourself. You have to be self-reflective. You have to figure out what you want, and then you can set your goals. Intention invites an individual to do an inventory of their lives. Am I satisfied with my existence? Is this it? Am I capable of more? Am I fulfilling my potential? I'll be talking about the framework that I use to look at my whole life in the next video. In order to set our goals, we have to ask ourselves, what do we actually want to achieve? And this means that we have to be vulnerable and self-reflect. And understandably, people don't want to do this, and they spend their lives distracted or numbing pain, and I get that, and I still do that. Often you'll find that we're interested in what other people's lives are doing, and especially if they're negative. We love a bit of gossip in a friendship group, or reality TV, or even current affairs. All these mediums are a way of us to feel better about our own lives because we hear negative stories about other people's, and yet we don't focus on our own lives. Negative headlines sell more papers, and negative thumbnails get more clicks. And when it comes to setting intentions and evaluating your own life, I've used journaling for a number of years now, and I find that really helpful. But I do think that journaling has some limitations around this, and mainly that journaling can't hold you accountable, it can't ask you questions, and it can't evoke that same emotion of going to see people and having to say, what have I done? And being honest and open with someone else. The fact that the pages don't ask questions is a good and a bad thing. It means that you can figure out exactly what you believe about something without upsetting someone. And Anne Frank talked about this in her diary when she said that the paper has more patience than man. And I've heard this quote quite a lot when people are talking about journaling in a really positive way. But if you go and actually look at the quote, Anne Frank then goes on to lament the fact that she doesn't have meaningful relationships in her life, and she can't really relate to other people, she can't be open or talk about deep and meaningful things with her family. The journal is clearly not doing that for her either. And I've definitely felt that, and I've felt that actually that's something I've gained in this group that I can't get from journaling. And the next thing to talk about is reevaluation. When setting out on a journey, one plans a route and packs a map. Merely planning a route isn't enough. We need to be able to check our course along the way to avoid ending up in the wrong destination. When I started this group, the main goal was to grow on YouTube. This had previously been a dream when it was in my head, but then I took some action and I turned it into an actual goal. Following that, I then wanted to post every single week, and as you can see, I didn't quite do that. However, in this time, I know that I had to go to that meeting every single week and tell them whether I'd hit my goal and what had gone well and what had been hard. So I was being kept accountable, but not only was it asking me to be accountable, but it was also inviting me to reevaluate my performance that week. Did I achieve the goal? Did it go well? Was it hard? Did I find it surprisingly easy? Would I do it that way again? If I didn't achieve the goal, did I make the effort to? Did something set me back? Was there something that I couldn't have anticipated that came up? Or was there something that came up that I could have anticipated? And we've talked about this in the group actually. Very rarely do we come to the meeting having made zero effort to achieve the goal that we'd set out the week before. It's not through lack of trying, it's not through motivation. However, sometimes our own psychology gets in the way, sometimes things come up that you can't control, sometimes you are putting the effort in, but it's slightly misdirected for the goal that you were trying to achieve that week. Other times you've just set some unrealistic expectations and the time frame is too short. Often I found that I just veered off course, and actually I was still going in the right overall direction, but I needed to focus again. The effort was there, it was just misplaced or inefficient. But every single week I was reminding myself, where do I want to go and how am I going to get there? And that was really, really helpful across all of my life, setting those intentions and reevaluating how I was doing. So if you're enjoying this content so far, I'd be really grateful if you could help me achieve my goal, which is to get to 10,000 subscribers. Click subscribe down below, like the video, and share it with someone that wants to achieve their goals in 2024. So the last thing to talk about is consistency. And it's hard to get through a self-improvement video without talking about this wonder drug that is consistency. And I've found that this group has massively boosted my consistency. I would never have passed paces if I hadn't been consistent. However, in my experience, consistency is this elusive thing where actually if you're trying to achieve it, you're probably not going to. And actually you achieve it when you're not trying to. Often people look for motivation to be consistent, but actually I found over my time that it's the habits that form or the behavior that changes by design that leads to the most improvements in consistency, rather than the intentional effort or the motivation. James Clear talks about this in his book, and he talks about identity habits being the highest form of habit. And I found that this group really tapped into my identity habits and leveraged them to make sure that I was consistent every single week. Firstly, each week I knew I had a meeting, and I knew Sarah and I knew Faye, and I wasn't going to just not turn up to this meeting. I was going to be there. The next thing I knew was that I had to present my progress and how I'd got on towards my goal. And I like to think of myself as someone with integrity, or someone that says something and then does it. And I've mentioned this, there was very few weeks where I feel like I hadn't really tried towards my goal. I don't like letting people down, and I don't like saying something and then not doing it. So this group was leveraging that belief about myself to make me work towards my goal and achieve consistency. But like I said, with consistency, I wasn't trying to achieve consistency. It wasn't killing me to work towards those goals, and I wasn't having to motivate myself every single day. It just kind of happened. I said I was going to do something, and I knew I had a deadline of Friday. So I was going to get that done. And this is why Clear says that these are the most powerful habits that you can adopt. And it's because they come naturally to us. I wasn't going to not achieve those goals, or try towards them at least, because that's just not me. And there have been countless times where I've wrote a to-do list and I've got to the bottom and I haven't done the last 3 things on the to-do list that day, and I simply just cross them off and put them onto the next page. And I've done that for days and days and weeks on end. But I can't do that in this accountability group. There's no rollover into the next week. I don't like doing that. I don't want to. And when there is a goal that doesn't get achieved, I'm then going to definitely achieve it the following week. And I think that that, again, is what is more powerful than journaling or any other kind of productivity thing here, is that human nature, that human connection that you don't want to let other people down. You don't want to look like you're not trying. It almost leverages your own self-consciousness against you. And it's very clever, but it really works. So the other 2 things that kept me consistent, I think, were the structure and the fact that we were working as a team. The most productive time of my life was undoubtedly when I was at school. And that's because I had a timetable which literally told me where I needed to be and what I'd be learning every single minute of the day. It told me when I'd have some rest. Then I was also working within teams. I was in lessons with peers and classmates, and we were all working towards the same goal, whether that was passing the exam in the classroom or whether it was on the sports field, and my team was training so that we could win the next game. Each Friday at 8 AM, I knew that I was going to be joining a Zoom call. Equally, I knew who I was meeting, and not only was I keen to show them what I'd achieved, I was also keen to hear what they'd done and how their week had been. I was then able to offer advice just as much as I was able to receive it, and over time the whole thing became more and more fun. I think this is ultimately why this works and why I managed to achieve some really good consistency, is because I found it fun. And there are loads of benefits that I've also had from this group, but these are the 3 main things that I think have really boosted my productivity in this time. So what makes a good group? And I've thought about this, and I do think that it's probably personal, and I'm sure that there are loads of ways a group could work. But these are the main things that I think that have really helped our group and why I've enjoyed it so much. So size-wise, I've definitely preferred it when the group's been a bit smaller. I really like it being 3, I think 4 would be fine, but I definitely felt that 5 or 6 was a bit big and a bit of a crowd. We don't see each other that often, and that's something that I really like. I mean, I've never met Faye in real life, which is a bit crazy, and I haven't seen Sarah in real life for about 6 years when we were at med school, and even then, I don't think we ever spoke. And I've talked about this earlier in the video, but I think the fact that this group is completely separate to my private life or my professional life down here in London, it makes it a really nice space where I can be honest, and I'm not carrying my own biases from my professional or personal life into the group, and equally people can give me some honest, unbiased feedback. I think I find that really difficult with friends. Sarah and Faye are actually childhood friends, so I'm sure you could do this, but for me, I think there are very few friends that I'd want in my accountability group. The next thing to talk about is psychology, and I think we got really lucky with this because I think we all have very similar psychologies, and this is probably something you might find more difficult to plan for when you're setting up a group, but over time I found that we all seem to struggle with the same similar things. I've mentioned that I struggle with imposter syndrome. I can be a perfectionist and I procrastinate quite a lot. And I don't want to speak for the others, but I have found that they also struggle with these things too. And I found this helpful because actually on a personal level, I'm able to relate to these people. I'm able to talk about my own experience when they're coming across an issue, and equally they know what they're talking about when I have an issue, whether that's perfectionism or people pleasing. And I think it makes the whole group a lot more relatable. I think if you had someone in there that was really confident and never felt like an imposter, they'd probably find it hard to understand what I was talking about when I had imposter syndrome. And equally, they probably wouldn't offer great advice. And when they came to the group and had their own issues, they would be around different things, and I would find it probably hard to relate to them. I think naturally we found a group that does seem to share the same psychology and as a result come across the same issues. And I think that's been really good. And on a sort of more macro level, it's quite interesting and I think reassuring that actually time and time again, the same things come up. Whether it's the fact that we don't feel confident in ourselves or the fact that I've procrastinated and not done something, it's all psychology. You know, very rarely do we come to the group and have something that is completely novel, some kind of very technical problem. All of it boils down to us trying to figure out our own problems, and the biggest limiting factor to that is your own psychology. And I think as much as that means that trying to master your psychology is the way to achieve what you want to achieve and your goals in life, it also is reassuring because you are the master of your own psychology. I think the fact that we have a regular time is really helpful. There will be rare occasions where we'll change the whole time because no one can make it, But at the same time, if you can't make it, you just post in the WhatsApp group, say what your week was like and what your goals are for next week, and the other two just meet and have the meeting. But it always seems to go back to that regular time of 8 a.m. on Friday. And I think that is really quite nice. I think it sets a tone of consistency. And each week we have the same basic structure as well. I've sort of talked about it, but what we'll do is we'll meet, we'll talk about the challenges of last week, we'll talk about the wins of last week, and spend the first half basically talking about how our weeks have gone. Sometimes we'll score them out of 10, and then we'll look forward to the next week and we'll talk about the goals that we want to set. So if I were to go about setting my own group, obviously on paper it's actually not that hard. All you need is Zoom, a regular time, and a bunch of people that you're going to meet with. I would recommend following that same basic structure: what went well, what was tough, and what are our goals next week. And there you have it. All you need to do is send out a tweet or maybe put a LinkedIn post saying that you're in this industry, you do this, and you struggle with this. Would anyone like to join your accountability group? But in reality, I didn't set up this group. I was invited by Sarah, and I'm really grateful that I was. I probably wouldn't have set up this group myself. For those people that are in the same boat, I've set up a group this year where we're going to be meeting every single Sunday in 2024. It's going to be called Self-Improvement Sundays, and our first meeting is the 7th of January at 9 a.m. That's going to be a regular time, so 9 a.m. every single Sunday, and the best thing about it is completely free. I'm hoping to build out a community, and we're going to be using that same very simple structure that I've gained so much from. I'm hoping together that we can make 2024 one of the best years yet, and I want to help you achieve your goals in 2024. There's information about it down in the description. If that sounds good to you, then please check that out, and I'll see you on Sunday. Equally, if you're not interested in that, thanks so much for watching the video, and if you're enjoying this self-reflective content, then here's a video about how I lost my job earlier in the summer, and here's a video about how my life has changed since I've given up alcohol for nearly a whole year now. Thanks very much, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.